Welcome back to the Business Roundtable Podcast. I'm your host, David Carr, founder of Steward, your business, bringing great guests to you week after week. This week, we have a brand new guest, Thanos. Thanos, we're super excited to have on. I'm going to get into what Thanos does and his superpower, so to speak. But before we do that, I want to get into the problem that we're going to break down a little bit is that there's oftentimes bottlenecks in businesses. There's bottlenecks and burnout in people. And this is where Thanos particularly is fantastic at helping get particularly software teams unstuck and without burning out people. When we're dealing with missed deadlines, slow delivery, maybe frustration between your business and your engineering or production, the team is just not working collaboratively. That's where Thanos comes in, and today's conversation is all about how we as leaders can remove those, really help our teams deliver without piling on more pressure. Thanos, it's super glad to have you here. Of Cosmic Tea Cups, and maybe you can explain us how you came up with that name too. Thanos Diacakis, thank you for being on the podcast with us today.
I'm super excited to be on, David.
Yeah, absolutely. You just to give a little bit of background, and I want you to expand on this. I know you've been doing software engineering for like 25 years. You've worked at startups, high growth companies. I know you worked at Uber in the past, and you've really helped scale from zero to like millions of users. I mean, so you've kind of seen the gamut and working from very small teams to global organizations. So I feel like you've got a slice, much like I've kind of my journey in the AEC world, in the tech world, you've kind of seen this and been able to help teams deliver effectively and actually enjoy the work. Now, like, I'm never doing that again, right?
Yeah, that was kind of my realization. So I like I said, I've worked in a bunch of places. They say I've been around the block, and if I had hair, you could see there's a lot of it is gray at this point in time. But one of the things that I realized is that all software teams struggle. And in a lot of places that I worked at, it was kind of toil and it sucked. It wasn't really good.
Mm-hmm.
You could get some things deployed and delivered to the customer, and that felt good. But like the way to get there often was just painful, and the teams were just burnt out, and there's not like a good vibe, not a good feeling in there. And a couple of years ago, when I took a step back and started Cosmic Teacups in this mode, my realization was that it doesn't really need to be this way, right? There's like 30, 40, 50 things that teams need to do to be productive. And all the teams that I'd been at, they were doing like half of those. And it wasn't like the same half. It's not like everyone is missing X. It's just like there's a bunch of best practices, for lack of a better word. And no one is really following all of them. And, not every best practice fits every team and so on. But there's often a lot of really good stuff that we know how to do that was just left on the table and no one was touching. And they were just too busy doing the work, not looking at how they're doing the work. And that's where I thought, well, holy cow, there's an opportunity to help people here. We can not only just go work for one company and help that one team, but I can form a business and do this as a coaching business and help lots of teams achieve this. And software engineering doesn't need to suck. We can have a better velocity. We can deliver value to our customers. We can do it at better quality. So we're not waking up someone in the middle of the night because some bug came up and this customer is screaming, get it fixed. And as we're doing this, we can also be happy. Like I became a software engineer. I enjoyed the craft. I enjoyed building stuff and seeing it. I didn't do this to be in thousands of meetings and have people yelling at me was why this thing isn't in production yet, right?
Yes.
So one of my goals is to bring that feeling back of like, this is fun. That back into the craft.
Absolutely. Scientists, a biologist, similarly, like, hey, and we get all stressed out about these deliveries and client demands. And so, what I love about having you on the podcast and those kind of lean in, even if you're not in the tech world per se, listen to how Thanos has gone from a technical specialist and helping people and coaching them and guiding them and taking all of his years of experience, and you understand how this works. And I think what's neat, Thanos, about having you come in, because I think there's a lot of coaches and experts out there, but they haven't lived it. You and I have both lived in our world. We've actually gone through the whole process, the whole project cycle. We've seen it repeatedly in different scales. And I think that says a lot about your own journey and applying this, because you could just go to another company, but like you and I, we started these companies as a way of helping more than just a company. And I love that.
Yeah, it's the scars of experience that are coming out.
Yes.
Yeah, I find it a lot of fun because, in addition to having your own business and having the flexibility that comes with that, I also really would like to see the industry move forward. Like when I look across companies and I look in the software industry, there's a lot of things that are just really broken, that not very many companies are actually good at getting software out the door. And it doesn't need to be this way. We know better. We can do better.
Yes.
So part of it for me is like, get the word out. It's like, no, we can do better, folks.
Absolutely. We can now do better. So before we kind of get into the better part, let's break it down a little bit about we're talking specifically about software teams, but I'm sure this is going to apply to other teams. But why do you see teams getting stuck in regularly, Thanos, like where it's just breaking down and not moving forward? Where do you see that typically?
Yeah, let's break this down. There's the software angle that doesn't apply to other places, but there's a more general angle. But let's start with the software angle. With the software angle, where I see the most broken places is usually the interface between software engineering and the rest of the organization. So typically in a bigger company, you might have like a product management type feature and a software engineering side, and the interface between the two is broken. In a smaller company, you might have like the business lead or the business owner and a few engineers, and that interface is often broken. The one side doesn't understand the needs and the language of the other, and when that communication breakdown occurs, not good things happen. Just to put that a bit more concrete, the way that this typically manifests is the business wants new features. They want to go sell stuff. Their clients want to see new stuff. The software, the company sells software or sells some kind of service to the users delivered through software. And when new features are deployed, that's how value is realized, right? You deliver features, you get cash in some way. That's kind of the basic mechanism, right? So the business owner is very motivated to see new features come in. Oftentimes you'll have a new deal that is contingent upon this new feature existing. So all the software team is conceivably hearing is that we need to build features. Now, if you're in software engineering, you probably understand that there's other things that the software engineering team needs to do. I like something called the flow framework, and that talks about defects or bugs. Stuff was broken, we need to go fix it. We talk about technical debt or investments. We had this old software over here. We need to replace it with this new one over here because we can go faster in the future if we don't have to, deal with this drag. And there's risk aspects of we need to have these libraries. They're 2 years old. We need to upgrade them because we're going to get hacked. And oftentimes what happens is the software engineering team, because they're always pummeled with build new features, they forget or they get disincentivized to deal with these other things. And as a result, their tools get blunter and blunter. And if you don't sit and stop and sharpen your tools every now and then, your delivery speed becomes slower and slower. And then more bugs start creeping in. And now you're spending more and more of your time fixing bugs. So this may start from the business side not having the right language to communicate to the software team what they need doing, but also the software team often doesn't have the language to say, hey, I don't want carte blanche to stop all your features and do X for like 6 months, but we do need to have some of our time spent in doing these other activities. Otherwise, our long-term velocity suffers. So that's kind of like one example of where that interface usually suffers. And that's kind of often a place where I start when we look at a team of how do you work? How do you communicate about these things? We want to create this healthy tension where the business can specify their needs, the engineering team can specify their needs, and they can have this creative tension and resolve it and saying, yeah, we're going to spend 30% of our time building new features, 20% of our time building bugs, 30% doing investments. Next month, we have this new feature we need to build, so we're going to shift everything towards features. But then the month after that, we're going to do a little catch up and catch up over here. And when we do this, we don't want that to take too long. We don't want to spend 6 months building new features and then have to do 6 months of catch up because that just becomes awkward.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the first aspects of how I see this in software teams. But if you kind of generalize this and bring this to broader teams, one thing that I see is teams start too many things and finish too few things. They get excited about, oh, this is a new thing we got to do. And they just start it and they don't focus on where they realize the value, which is, as we talked about a minute ago, is getting the thing out the door. When you get the thing out the door, you make cash. So my advice is take a step back and make sure that you start few things and you finish those things. That's the equivalent. Like if you look at other businesses, that's building things that you don't ship is inventory, right? You know, retail, if you build up inventory, that is hard money that is sitting in a warehouse, maybe getting stolen, maybe getting rusty, maybe getting lost. That is not value realized until the customer picks this up and I charge them. I'm not making money. So building software that sits there isn't quite right. So that the advice sometimes is you have to slow down what you start so you can speed up what you finish. And when you start from I realize value when I ship and work your way backwards, you can now see where the bottlenecks lie in terms of what is preventing me from shipping, what is preventing me from getting things out the door, which, more cash, better.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you brought up a whole great host of points in there, Thanos. Because what I hear you say is, and I find this, especially when you have different groups kind of running in parallel that aren't talking with each other. I was like, well, I'm just going to go, I'm going to go, I'm going to go. And there's like, hold on, we haven't compared notes and like you said, objectives. And so it sounds like you come in, Thanos, and kind of slow down a little bit, and let's kind of take all the puzzle pieces and let's just lay them out here and see what's going on, because we may be putting gas over here and we don't realize what that's going to do over here, and say, well, maybe we need to pause or at least have a better plan. It sounds like, is what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah. So you mentioned visualizing this, right? Like putting it out and laying it out. I think that's usually one great way of looking at bottlenecks. But let me give you an example. I went in a team about a year ago, and they had this flow, let's call it. And maybe it's easier to visualize, like, if you go to one of these places that makes you like a salad, and you go in and you order your salad, and you go to the first person, they just pick the greens, and then you go to the second person and they pick like the seeds that they throw on, you go to the third person and they put the sauces on and they hand it to the last person, right? Like that's kind of like a workflow where everyone adds a little bit of value. And when you see this in software companies, you'll see something like you have maybe someone in product decides like we should build this. They hand it over to a researcher that looks how this feature should work. Maybe it goes on to a designer that like designs the pages. It goes to a software engineer that builds it. It goes to a tester that tests it, and maybe someone deploys it. Not always you have all these steps, but bear with me and you'll see where I'm going with this example, right? So think of what happens if something reaches like step 5 and then you realize that doesn't work, and you need to throw it all the way back to step 1 because that person needs to rework it, right? Because you built a pipeline where by the time this item of work has reached step 5, the person working on step 1 is 5 items ahead. They've put 5 more things in the pipeline. So they're going to have to pause whatever they're doing. Now that creates a gap in the pipeline. They're going to have to rework it. Now the person in step 5, like 4 cycles later, they're going to be waiting because now there's that gap that occurred in there. And you have all these communication breakdowns because every time you throw it over from one person to the next, you get this lost information and lost context. And when the rework hit back to step 1, that's like maybe 5 weeks later and they've forgotten what they did. So they have to redo it from scratch. So we this team had created this model. And I've seen this a lot. This is not just this one team where they've tried to be efficient locally, right? Everyone has their pipe filled at all times, and there's work coming in, and they can work on it, but they're not focusing on what comes out the other end. And if you kind of like play the simulation out, what you'll see is the end is very, very spotty because you have all this rework and things are just spinning around, and people are working on 5 different things, and they're context switching, and they're confused, and there's meetings after meetings. And because there's so many meetings, when you want to have a meeting, you have to wait 4 or 5 days till you can get the slot with the right people in this meeting, and it just turns into this mess. So what I usually advocate is just like, completely evaporate all of that and create cross-functional teams. By the way, there's a really good book about this called Team Topologies. If you haven't read it,
we'll put it in the show notes. Yeah.
And this advocates for stream-aligned teams. So you have a cross-functional team that is able to have all the expertise needed to make decisions and be able to make these decisions as to how to deliver a product inside the team. And they can sit and collaborate in one, this can be time, this can be space, this can be physical location, and so on. But they can sit together and collaborate with the goal of shipping one thing out the door. You can stretch this. It could be 2 things, but it shouldn't be like 5 things.
Yes.
Right? So they have like a narrow specification. And the goal there is it doesn't really matter if everyone in that team is fully occupied and fully busy, because what we're looking for is is the team as a whole able to put output out?
Yes.
Again, don't take this to extremes. Not everyone should be sitting around the whole time.
Yep.
But the general idea is that if people are available when the engineer has a question as to how this should be implemented, if they can reach out to the designer, get an answer right now, we just maybe have saved 6 hours, or this thing can be delivered 6 hours earlier because we didn't have to wait a day to make that decision. We may have saved that engineer a context switch because they wouldn't drop this to the side and work on something else and then come back and make a mistake. So these collaborative cross-functional teams is where the magic happens.
Yeah, I love that. Can I ask you a question on that? On the cross function, because I think there's power in that. Because sometimes I feel like people get kind of isolated. I only do this, and so it's like, how do we find just the right, like you said, kind of keeping people busy? Do you find organizations that are resistant to that? Because like you said, they want they want to do that side, and kind of how do you break through that?
Yeah, that's a culture thing that you really need to break through. Like your job is to ship things, and everyone's job is to ship things, and you do what it takes to ship things. I have very little tolerance in my teams when someone says, well, that's not in my job description.
Yeah.
Like, buddy, we got to change that mentality or we're not going to get along very quickly here. I mean, and I think everyone gets satisfaction, right? When the team is shipping something, you get your dopamine hit. When in a lot of the teams that I work with, the goal is you build something, you test it, and you deploy it. And often this thing can happen in one day, right? I can build a new feature. Someone goes, spends a few hours and builds it. Now with AI, that is even increasingly easier. We can all look at it and ship it. And that's satisfaction, right? Geez, I did something. Like, no, I have 1,000 people that are using my thing today that I built right now. That's kind of what way we're in there for. I don't think anyone was imagining, sitting in high school and going like, my dream is to receive Jira tickets over the line and then go spend some coding and then push a PR out and then work on my next Jira ticket, right? I don't think anyone really wants to do that.
Right. Oh my goodness. I love that I love the concept and you're laying it out and like you said, it sounds to me too, what I hear you say is don't get too many initiative things. That's kind of what a recurring thing I'm hearing is you're overcomplicating, and that's where you can get stuck. You got to make too many decisions. So just kind of narrowing it down, but you also have to kind of, like you said, coming in, Thanos, you kind of help them get consensus on what are those most important things. So like you have different competing ideas. Well, I think we should be spending more time here. I think we should be here. But then it's like you said, well, what's the results? You're not actually getting the results. So we need to rethink this.
Yeah. And typically the teams should have everyone heard, right? So if you look at the flow framework and you break this down in features, defects, investments, and risks, typically the features and the defects are going to be sourced from the business or the product side of things, right? They'll have a harder opinion on what the feature should look like to go make some new sales or what the customers are yelling about for these bugs. Whereas engineering is going to be more strongly biased on these are the investments that we think are going to make us speed us up. These are the technical risks that we're having. Now, this doesn't mean it's a one-way street. And just because product said this feature, we should build it, you should build it. Because engineering might say, it's really hard to build it this way, but we could build it this way and then get the customer benefit that you want. And there's a healthy negotiation there. Or when the engineer says we have this risk that we feel is a big risk, the product says we're willing to take this risk for a little while if you can give us this other thing. Like there's a healthy negotiation to be had, and you should have everyone heard in there. But what I see is that collaboration often doesn't happen. Like a very common pattern is you have a business person, they tell the engineering team, go build this. And then they'd leave them alone for a month and come back after a month. And it's like, is it done? And it's like, yeah, it's kind of sort of done, but we need another couple of weeks. And then a couple of weeks come back and the business person kind of looks at this. And it's like, that's not what I asked. I wanted this, this, and that. And it's like, well, you probably should have left it alone for 6 weeks. So I encourage people to, talk to each other. Like if you want something done, check into it every few days, go see the prototypes, offer quick feedback to the team. Don't let them alone for 6 weeks. And then oftentimes what happens when that happens once is the product person says, okay, next time I'm going to write a tighter spec. So they go and write like a longer spec with pages and pages and try to spell everything out how that works. And the reality is with software, typically we build things that are new. If there's something that it was off the shelf and ready, we'd just go buy it. We wouldn't spend all the money and effort to build something new. And when you build something new, let's face it, we don't really know what we're doing, right? We might think we know what we're doing, but we don't really know what we're doing. So until you prototyped it and put it in front of someone, you have no idea. So writing a really tight spec and spending a day writing a spec is not really good. Write 3 paragraphs, have them build it, go look at the first version the next day, offer some feedback and go iterate. Now, I'm not saying this as to, don't do any forward thinking, don't do any planning. Like there's some low-hanging fruit you can think of in advance and think of it, but you got to strike that line of how much do I want to think in advance and how much do I want to, let's go start executing and learn from actual practice. And my rule of thumb is like 20% upfront and then let's go learn. Let's go start executing and learn, and we'll figure out so many more things than trying to do like a brain dump. What's all in my head? I was going to write on the paper.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure I could hear that because I've worked with other types of engineers where they're very risk averse and they want to make sure everything is covered. And there's a balance. Like I hear you saying there's a balance there, Thanos, of like, yes, I understand that. And I think that's a team dynamic I'm sure you have to work with too, like appreciating, like I said, these different voices that are heard and their concerns and saying, and we're making a conscious decision one way or the other, right?
Yep. And ask yourself, like when you did that, like upfront planning and you planned to every T, how much did that survive contact with the enemy? What's that Mike Tyson thing that he says, like all plans are go out the window after the first punch?
Yeah, right.
That's the same thing, right? You start writing the first few lines of code, it's like, oh, that's not going to work.
Yes. And I think, and to your point, I think like you said earlier, if you streamline a little bit, you're not doing so many different things. You can, get that one thing done and then see what happens and kind of go back and reassess. And I think that there's what I hear you say is don't let that feedback loop go too long. What I heard is make sure it's a shorter window so that you can make iterative adjustments. Is that an accurate statement?
Yeah, absolutely. I cannot tell you how many things I've been in companies that I did like yearly planning, and they planned like 100 things, and they did the first 2, and then like, oh, priorities changed, and the next 98 didn't actually ever happen.
Mm-hmm.
And it's fine, right? Things change, you do different things, but like we just spent like 2 weeks doing yearly planning, and like we could have done it in 5 minutes because you just plan the first 2 things and then throw then just do another 5 minutes when those 2 things are done.
Right.
So that's where I encourage, like, if you're doing yearly planning and you're nailing all the things that you did in yearly planning, good for you. Keep doing what you're doing.
I haven't heard anybody do that.
But I've never seen anyone do that. So like, if you really are the risk averse and it's like, no, we need to have a yearly planning, go back and look at how successful you've been with that. And like I said, if you've been successful, good for you. Keep at it. But most of the times people are not, but they just keep doing the same insanity over and over again. It's
I agree with you. There's a great book I read years ago called 12-Week Year. I'm actually certified with Flow Focus Planner. I've got mine right here, which is a quarterly based planner, but it breaks things down by month, by week, by day, right?
Things like, here's mine.
There you go. So we live from what we're sharing because we've learned, like you said, Thanos, but you and I both respectively in our industries for over 25 years of like, we're trying to break the insanity of doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. It won't work. At least that's what we're both saying, having here. So listen to a few of us that have been in the trenches, like you said, got the scars, if you will.
And that's one of the things that I was kind of crystallizing a couple of years ago when I started this, is that typically when someone has a problem, they cause effect. They say, okay, I'm seeing this effect. I think this is the cause. Let me go fix this cause to change the effect. And this works when the cause and effect are obvious, right? When you can see, if I change this, that will happen. Oh yeah, duh. Let me try this. But oftentimes what I see teams is they've tried all the obvious things, right? Now they're reaching the area where the cause and effect is not obvious. It's actually kind of counterintuitive sometimes. And that's where you need the expertise of someone like myself that is, has the scars and the gray hairs and whatever analogy you want to use, that can go say, okay, like what's happening here is, for example, you have way too much work in your system and everyone is just cycling around. And the reason you're not achieving things is because you need to try to slow down. What we were saying in the beginning, right? Take a few things off the system, lighten the load, and then people can focus on one thing and get out the window, right? That's not an intuitive solution, but you're not going to try it if you're not, spending enough time thinking about how software is delivered. If your focus is, oh crap, that customer has X and it needs it next week, and I go to like, okay, who's going to stay late to do this and that and the other? That's not the way to solve this. You might solve it once, but it's not a sustainable way to
no, that's a great point, Thanos, because I have been there in that place too, where you're kind of pushing and grinding harder. And I was actually just working with a client, nothing with software, but she was like, well, I'll use AI to help me, and she wasn't getting the answer. And I said, well, it's because the inputs that you're putting in there and the things you don't know. And it was an order of operations. And I think I was on another podcast episode. I said, you could take the elements of making a cake and throw it in the oven, but if they're not mixed in the right order, you're not going to get a cake, And you're like, I have all the pieces, it should work, and it's not working. And it's like you said, having somebody like you, Thanos, or myself coming into the organization and saying, well, that's because you went in this order, you didn't think about this, how this is going to affect these people. And I think that there's power and have a third party like yourself, Thanos, come in objectively, right? Because you're like, hey, I'm just looking at this holistically, what's going on, what's working and not working, so that you guys can get moving and feel good about the work you're doing at the end of the day.
I'm embarrassed to admit that when I was much, much younger than I am now, I thought when I went to a team and then they were doing not clever things, I thought these guys are stupid and I'm smarter and I'm going to fix it all. Turns out that was not the case. I was very, very wrong. They were not stupid. They were busy. And what was happening is they had goals in mind and they were focused on executing on these goals. They didn't really have the time to take a step back and not just do the work, but think about how are we doing the work? Is this the most effective way of doing the work? And where you see really successful teams is they allocate time for that introspection. And they try a few experiments and they say, in this week, instead of just doing the work, we think we have a problem here. We think this is a bottleneck. We're not sure because sometimes it's obvious, but most of the times it's subtle. We think we have a bottleneck here. Why don't we try tweaking this thing? And you can tweak a thing or two, probably again, not 5, and see what is like this. Maybe this is counterintuitive, but if we tweak this thing, do we get an effect at the other end? And if you try these improvements, what you'll find is like even if you make a 1 or 2% improvement week on week, these compound. So I believe 2% improvement every week is a 2.5 or so times improvement in a year, and an 8 times improvement in 2 years. I should really double check this math one day, but I think I did it a while back, and that's accurate.
But the main thing is compounding. I think that's the biggest
thing. It's compounding, exactly. Yes. And then it works to your advantage just to spend just a little bit of time just improving how you do the work. Because if you don't, then a competing team is going to do that, and they're going to eat your lunch. Yeah. I have a client that I've been working with for a couple of years, and we've been doing like these small improvements. They're like very quickly growing. They haven't stopped selling. They're selling new customers, and we're setting up new customers every week. And they've been building new features to enable that. But they've been also putting the time in and doing these small improvements. And 2 years into it, they're like, when I started with them, they were shipping like one feature every couple of weeks. Now every engineer is shipping like a couple of features a day, and they are literally taking the lunch from the competition. They're just closing deals left and right. And it's just insane to see that. It's just so satisfying to watch that thing happen. But that's because they're closing this feedback loop and doing these improvements that you need to stay ahead of things.
I would say, Thanos, just to confirm with me, but if that example, if the team is seeing that success, I would imagine you're keeping that core team, and you're not losing. You're not having a revolving door. Oh, we just lost a software engineer. We just lost another person. Now we got to find somebody, bring them in, get them up to speed. That takes time. Understand our culture, how we work, because every time you bring in anybody new, your capacity decreases in the short term because you've got to get them up to speed and integrated, right?
Yeah, so that's true, but that sort of brings in another aspect, right? And I think most of the stuff that we've been talking about so far is sort of procedural. But when I work with a team, I usually will look at 3 things. I'll look at technology, architecture, kind of like the tech side, the process side, and then the culture side.
Yeah.
And the culture side is kind of like process and tech kind of over the long run. But I like to use dumb technology. Like I don't want the everything to be the most cutting edge, right? Because dumb means it's simple. I don't need to have the smartest engineers on the planet to handle this complicated mess that I created for myself to deal with it. Because if I lose one of my smartest engineers, then it's really hard to replace them. So I like to make architectures that are really dumb. Because dumb means fast, dumb means simple, dumb means debug. It doesn't mean I'm not taking cutting edge improvements that will make me deliver like super cool stuff. I am using some of the best architectures known to humanity to create these things, but I don't want to have those risks where I have to have like the top notch engineers, because those are hard.
That's so true.
They're expensive. So I want to be able to take junior engineers and coach them and mentor them and get them to the point where they're comfortable working with these things. They're happy. They can see the delivery. And that's kind of like getting to where you started with the question, is that makes them stick around.
Yeah,
they can kind of work at their schedule. They can work at a happy pace. They're not being jerked around with being in like meetings or changing the priorities on them the whole time. That builds flexibility in them. They're happy when the priorities change, because it happens rarely. And they see the results go out. And I think that's what everyone really sees. They kind of build something that they feel is cool, and it goes out in the market, and they're seeing that success.
It's exciting when that happens. I worked for, this is an environmental consulting firm, Thanos, but you just reinforced the idea of keeping it simple. This company had an amazing, the owner was really tech savvy, had an amazing Excel spreadsheet with all these bells and whistles, right? It was, I like say, a high performance sports car, but every time her team would touch it, not every time, but many times, they would mess it up, and everything would stop, and she'd have to come in and fix it all up. And then it was like, to your point, if you could make it more robust, yes, it's not going to be flying down the racetrack, so to speak, but it as a high performance sports car. But I like that, use that analogy, because if you have a high performance sports car and you overcorrect, you're going to crash. If you have something that's a little bit more a daily driver, it's going to get you there. It's not going to and it's going to be consistent all the time, right?
Yeah, but I think the analogy sort of breaks down, because I think you implied that if you have a more boring car,
doesn't have to be boring. It just has to be reliable. How about that?
What's your goal, right? Like if your goal is speed, then you want this car. But if your goal is to transport the most things, then what you need is maybe like an array of really reliable 18-wheelers, right?
There you go.
It's not fancy, there you go. But like you will deliver way more than your sports car.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's kind of like goes into the speed versus quality thing that you said. Like I think looking at the technology side, what I do with all my teams is we set them up in the right way. So speed and quality is not a trade-off. Speed and quality go together, right? You mentioned the example of your contact that every time you touch it, you'd break it. That's
Yeah.
really bad. Like with software, we strive to build software that is changeable because we know that is one thing we really, really value: optionality, right? We want to be able to
Yes.
do new things. So if you built it in a way that is ossified and every time we touch it, it sort of crackles and crumbles, we're in a bad spot. So I strive to set the teams up where there's like automated testing is kind of one of the big ones that happens in there, where every time you want to make a tweak, it's really easy to see what happens. Is like loose coupling and tight cohesion, where the functionality that's related lives close to each other. So if you modify it here, you're not breaking something way over there. So we do have techniques to fix that. And if your team is not there, we can get you there slowly and safely so that you can make these changes. Because changing the software is like the one of the biggest things that probably a company needs to be able to succeed. Like if you built it once and then it stays there, that's usually not a realistic scenario, right?
Right. So you mentioned earlier about your process, which is technology, process, and culture. Break that down a little bit more for us. So like when you're working with a company and you're looking at these things, kind of walk us through your unique way of coming alongside them.
Yeah, so I kind of follow a 4x3-ish matrix. And again, I'm very dogmatic about very few things. So I'm not particularly dogmatic about this. It's kind of more the framework of how we start. And if you're lost, it's a really great way to start, but you can jump around and you can move around depending on what you need. Again, if you're jumping around, doing this completely backwards, I'd probably rethink it, but like it's okay to do some little jumping around. So the 3 framework is what I already mentioned, is looking across technology, process, and culture. And then I look at this from sequentially from iteration, quality, complexity, and planning. So let me break this down and I'll explain this. So the first thing when I start with a team is, are you able to iterate and get your software out the door quickly? Back 20 years ago, we would deploy software every 3 months. If I talk for too long and don't touch my computer, it goes to sleep. So a few years to 20 years ago, we would look at software. We deliver software every 6 months or 3 months or something really long. And over the past 20 years, we've gotten a lot better to deploying this a lot more frequently. So one of the first things that I start with is a lot of companies adopted the sprint model, and they deliver in sprints, and that's 1 or 2 weeks. I typically like to get that shorter to days. But if you're already doing weeks, that's not a bad place to be, but usually we can do better at that. So I usually will start and look at what is in the way of getting releases to the customers, say daily or every few days or whatever, and look at all the steps that are kind of blocking us or presenting friction to do that, right? Because if you have like a bug and you can't get software for like out for another week, you can't really have happy customers because you have to wait a really long time to get these things. So the first thing that we fix is iterations, like automating everything, making sure that whatever is needed, you can just write some code changes and get them out to the world quickly. Once we get that one done, we look at quality. And that means, okay, not only have to get it out, but it has to be good. I can't just get out junk to the customers because they're not going to like it. Now, if you cannot get iterations out quickly, you cannot even get to quality. So that's why I kind of focus on iterations first. Even if you don't have the perfect amount of tests or whatever you need to do to get it out, if you can't get it out, you can't even test it. So that's just not a point. And with quality, there's like a whole array of things that you can do in there that we kind of dig in detail. They start from like when the user is typing, when the engineer is typing the code, is your IDE giving you the squiggly lines of telling you what the wrong things are in there? I started off with one customer and on my first day, everything was red squiggly lines.
Oh boy.
And, they said, finish this. And 2 days later, I'm like, I'm still fixing the squiggly lines. And I'm like, no, that's normal. I'm like, what do you mean it's normal? Like you can't have squiggly lines everywhere. That's not going to work. So we spent a few weeks cleaning that up. But you have static analysis tools. You have all sorts of stuff that as you're writing a code, you can find out the problems before you even get it all the way into dev or production. So we look at that and make sure that the quality is adequate. So now we've got iterations going out good. We can establish that we have some base level of quality that goes out there, or even like a really good level of quality. But by the end of that, and what usually happens now is you're getting pretty good. You're getting stuff in production and complexity is building. So your processes are getting more complicated. Your culture is getting more complicated. Your technology is getting more complicated. And complexity is enemy number one, right? You will collapse under your own weight if you don't fix that. So then we start looking and trying to see where we pick apart this complexity. What are things that we don't really need? Sometimes you had constraints, right? We wouldn't deploy on Fridays because when we broke something, there's no one around on Friday to fix it. So we only deploy Monday through Thursday. Right. And then 3 years later, now we have automated processes. Everything's tested. We almost never break it, but we still don't deploy on Fridays. Well, why not? We're not realizing value on Fridays where we could. We can actually deploy on Saturdays and Sundays. So these are complexity in the processes that we can remove. We no longer need this rule. Let's get rid of it and do without it. And that's kind of like from the procedural point, that's pretty straightforward. But from the architectural point, that gets a bit more interesting sometimes of figuring out, okay, are these things delivering value to the business? Do we still need these functionality? Do they only support 1% of the customers, but they're like 80% of the complexity of the code base? Could we get rid of them? So these are tough discussions to have, but necessary to keep you moving.
Yeah.
So once you've gotten iterations and you got quality and you fix complexity, now you're at the point where you can start thinking about planning and predictability, right? A lot of companies tend to try to do that first. So you have a team that I cannot execute, but I want to know what I'm doing a year out. And we kind of talked about that in the planning section earlier. So that's usually a very big mistake because you end up spending lots of time in activities that you can actually not deliver. You're not going to be good at planning if you can't execute. So all that time is just wasted. You're not learning anything from shipping the product. You're not learning anything from building the product. You're just spending time in planning activities that don't teach you anything. But when you've gotten the first three phases done, I think that's a good time because business at some point will have expectations of, okay, I can't tell me exactly when something's going to be done, but I need some ideas here. And you can slightly start stringing this along and you can figure out what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. Then you can string weeks together. And at some point you can start stringing quarters together. I typically don't go much further than quarters. That's kind of
it gets
so quickly.
fuzzy.
Usually that's as far as I can go. You can have like a very high idea of the roadmap going forward, but I don't even put dates on it because I think when people see dates, they just latch onto them and that becomes like a deadline at some point. And that's a conversation that I will have with the stakeholders and explain, look, I'm not going to give you early on much predictability like way further out, but I'm going to give you agility. You're going to be able to have an idea and we're going to have that in days or weeks, not in months or years. And I think that they usually appreciate that trade-off and see how that learning makes them be able to nail the marketplace a lot faster than sort of building the wrong thing, taking 6 months to like change course and doing that over and over again.
Yeah, I love that you've broken this down. I hope everybody's listening in. I know we're getting into the podcast. We're going to make sure, so as you guys are listening in, Thanos and I are connected on LinkedIn, and we're going to put in our show notes how you can follow up with him and Cosmic Teacups. Thanos, as we're wrapping it up here, what if there's a leader listening today that's frustrated with maybe slow delivery or this team tension? What would you say that they can do this week? If they haven't connected with you yet, but that they could say that, like you just kind of broke it down, something actionable or more than one thing that they can start working on themselves with their team today?
Yeah, I would say two things would be at the top of my list. The one thing is go create that creative tension between your business side and your engineering side. Go find out who these people are. If you don't talk to them a lot, go take them out to lunch and chat. And I don't expect business leaders will understand every single aspect of what the technology leaders are doing, but start developing some common language between each other at a high level to know what you are doing and start creating that creative tension and figure out what you want to do based on that rather than like a one-way kind of monologue. The second thing that I recommend is start looking at how you do the work. And again, this is going to be through that creative tension. It can involve both sides of the business. Again, you're all working for the same team. So when I say sides, I'm just distinguishing who's who, not that these are like opposing in a bad way, but start creating some experiments and not only do the work, but every week put some focus out, set some expectations that the team is supposed to look at how they're going to improve the work, spend 5-10% of their time, more if you can afford it, and think of how you're going to improve the work. And learn from these experiments and the benefits of these compound. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is now. So if you haven't been doing it, now is the best time. It doesn't need to be perfect. You just need a wedge in the door and get it rolling, and good things will flow from there.
You heard it from Thanos Diacakis. Thank you, Thanos, for being on the podcast. You guys go check him out, connect with him on LinkedIn, look in our show notes, leave comments. Thanos, it's just a real pleasure having you here today.
It was awesome being here. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. Of course, we love having you guys like and subscribe and all that good stuff, following along wherever that might be, on music, YouTube. Please come back, share with your network if you enjoyed this, and thanks for being here with us on the Business Roundtable. Bye, everybody.